So thanks, Simon, for inviting me. I'm very happy to fill Matheson's place here and talk to you about this paper on office and profession. I do think that the lawyers don't get out enough at the university, and I think that we should get to meet you guys more. This is an offshoot of a Marsden project that was on something else. It was about the way the state legislates on private law matters and the way democracy and professional lawyers kind of shape that important part of our legal infrastructure. But this is kind of an offshoot that kind of generalizes away from the legislator and the lawyers to thinking about office and profession, and it's part of an edited volume of the University of Toronto Law Journal on the idea of office in philosophy, politics, and law. So the way the paper is structured and the way I structured this is that first I want to say something about office, what I understand by the term office, what I take to be the logic of office, which is kind of a Weberian account of office within and outside a bureaucracy, and then talk a little bit about professions. By professions I mean something, I think, different from what we might mean by the colloquial use of the term profession. So sometimes we, as long as we meet some sort of appropriate standard at the workplace, we're being professional, but that's not the way I use the term. Professions is a sociological term of art here that means a privileged, limited set of occupations that get a high level of control over their own work. And the main analytical part of the paper is kind of thinking about the way these two institutions interact, a legal institution and a social institution. And then the most important part of the paper, and the kind of the shortest part of the paper, is what's happening to this conjunction today, since the 1960s, 1970s, basically with the decline of professionalism across different disciplines. Right. So, okay. So this is part of a volume about office, and it's really remarkable to note the different ways that different people use the term. And in particular, it's remarkable the way that political theorists and political philosophers use the term, particularly Rawls, who uses it to designate a social position with particular rights, privileges, and duties, and after him, everybody else, right? So for political philosophers lawyers sometimes talk about the office of property ownership, or the office of, or Andrew Sable talks about the office of the political organizer or the political activist. That's not the way I use the term office. I use the term office in a particular legal way, following the work of Max Weber, as a legal institution, not as a social institution. It's an institution in law. The terms of an office are always stipulated by law. It can be stipulated by public law, as administrative law and constitutional law, and it can be stipulated by contract law, which is the way that two individuals or corporations or legal personalities make law to themselves to be enforced by the state. In his discussion of bureaucracy and office, Weber really characterizes the institution of legal office as doing two things. So this is a paraphrase, but it's all in Weber. The first thing is it creates a division of labor between the household and the office, which is the workplace. So Weber says, in the household, in our personal lives, we are free to do whatever we want, to pursue whatever projects we want, to take care of ourselves and of our family and of our friends and our communities. But when we are in our office, we are pursuing someone else's purposes. We abide by the term of the office. We operate under this chain of bureaucracy and accountability. We are not free. We are doing something else. So this is the first division of labor. This is the first thing that office does. The second division of labor that is really underdeveloped in Weber, but is developed by later theorists, is a division of labor within the organization. So different offices within the organization do different things. They have different functions, and within the organizational or institutional setting, this is supposed to serve some rationale or purpose. An office is what's distinct about office in relation to other modes of regulating work within an organization or corporation is that that it has a certain sense of rigidity or stability to it. So most employees can be either employed or not employed, but office holders occupy an office that exists no matter who occupies it, and sometimes even when it's not occupied at all. So if arts, if the Dean of Arts leaves today, there might not be a Dean of Arts, but there will be an office of the Dean of Arts within the organizational structure. There will be an office of the Vice Chancellor. Without the Vice Chancellor, there will be a vacant seat on the Supreme Court, even if it's vacant. That's an office. That's the rigidity of office. And it has all sorts of legal consequences, because you can have rights, legal rights and duties and privileges associated with an organizational location rather than with a person. Okay. Public lawyers that are interested in questions of office for many different reasons normally define office as being impersonal and office holders as acting impersonally within the office. And we can see how this is really related to this first distinction, right? We are free to do whatever we want, in our personal lives, but as office holders, we act impersonally. And one of the things that I wanted to do here is kind of dig a little bit into that, and because this, in ways that we can get into in the Q&A, becomes really important in debates on privatization. Right? So it might be that office holders behave in one way, while corporations are incentivized by different means and with different purposes. So I wanted to dig a little bit into that and kind of investigate a little bit what we mean when we think that office holders act impersonally. The distinction here is a distinction between acting partially and acting impersonally, and I want to just give a brief introduction to that and then kind of move on from there. Okay. So this is for moral theory. This is not for pure theory of bureaucracy. When we reason, when we decide what to do, we are influenced by all sorts of reasons. One set of reasons has to do with the things that we value in the world. We value our relationships, we value our projects, we value our community, and all of these things give us reasons for action. Right? They can legitimately inform our practical reasoning. I want to give this talk, write this paper, publish this book. This is my project. It's valuable because I value it. And this gives me what we call partial reasons for action. But alongside partial reasons for action, which we all have, there are also impersonal reasons for action that apply to all of us equally, no matter what our attachments are and what we happen to value. Right? We all have reasons to feed the hungry, to keep the homeless warm in winter, to promote knowledge, to promote welfare. And they apply to us regardless of who we are. Like if you see somebody in need, it doesn't matter. Anybody in that position would have the same reasons to help this person. So I just in a way that is not directly relevant to what we talked, I think in other parts of my work that this is the main conundrum in moral theory, and both political morality and moral theory can learn a lot from investigating this a little bit more. And particularly I'm following here the work of Tom Nagel and Sam Scheffler, who've done both amazing work on this. Okay. when we think about bureaucracies and offices and kind of organizational functions, it's very easy to see why we might think that people operating within the structure operate based on impersonal reasons, right? Because here they're supposed to not care about, when they exercise the function of the office, they're supposed to not care about their own interests, their own funds, their own views, their own attachments and projects. They're supposed to abide by the terms of the office, listen to their superiors, etc. And I think this animates a lot of the attribution of impersonal reasons to office holders. The only problem is that office holders in modernity, and this is why I'm talking about the modern office, operate within a liberal and capitalist political economy in which people pursuing their own ends basically contract into their offices just like they contract into any other work. And when they contract into the office, they do it for salary, for reputation, for power, to pursue their own ideological attachment, their own views, their own ideas. This doesn't have to be sinister, but it can definitely be partial, right? And the idea is that within the modern bureaucracy, within the modern office, we do not really expect office holders to act impersonally in the Stoic sense. What office does is align the functions of the office with the partial interests of the individual to create a simulacrum of impersonal reasons to be followed by the office holder. And I think this is an important insight that I don't think it's incredibly sophisticated, but I think that it does dislocate a lot of the legal discourse around office and impersonality. A lot of people think that here I'm kind of I'm not respectful enough of office holders, and I attribute to them sinister interests, and etc. This is nice. It's more interesting when it changes colors. But I think that in the following example would be uncontroversial. An office within a private corporation, an office of a regional manager of some big corporation or something like that, would clearly be an office in which people are recruited, harnessed into this particular function. They operate on partial reasons, and there's no real strong dimension of impersonality to the office. And some people think that this is distinct about private corporations and private offices. But if we look at the kind of the foundations of modern political theory, we find a concern to partial interests and partial reasons kind of very early on, well before the modern office, 17th century. Thomas Hobbes writes that whoever bears the person of people, or is one of that assembly that bears it, bears also his own natural person. And though he be careful in his politic person to procure the common interest, yet he is more or no less careful to procure the private good of himself, his family, kindred, and friends. And for the most part, if the public interest chance to cross the private, he prefers the private. Blah, 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 blah. From whence it follows that where the public and private interests are most closely united, there is the public most advanced. So the idea that what office does, and the design of the institution is supposed to do, is to align the interests of the person performing the function with what you want them to do when you design the institution, is really early, and kind of matures in the late 19th century in Federalist Papers. And this is from James Madison, very, very, very famous quote, talking about constitutional design, the federal system. Ambition, says Madison, must be made to counteract ambition. The interests of the man, the reasons of partiality, must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place, the office. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government, but what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? So the idea that what institutional design does when we create offices perform functions, make people contact give them incentive, disciplinary measures, sanctions, career trajectories within kind of an office nexus, is actually aligning the partial interest with the function we want them to perform, I think, is quite present in our contemporary political thought. So not only private office, but okay. The main point I want to take out of this discussion of office is that the institution of office has two things. First, it has a strong instrumental dimension to it. Right? Office is about harnessing ingenuity, intellectual capacity, the labor of individuals in order to perform an organizational function. That's what office does. And modern office cannot be understood outside the context of a capitalist political economy that is premised on individuals assuming office as part of their work in order to sustain themselves for their own partial interest and their own other many attachments in life. This is true of public office as well as to private office. I see that Steve has something to say about that, but you can't say it now, you have to interview. Okay. Is this okay? Yeah. That was the okay. True that I'm kind of I sometimes talk way too fast. My students remind me I talk too fast. And with the accent it's kind of killer. Okay. Professionalism. If office is a creature of modernity and capitalism, then professionalism is a pre-modern, anti-capitalist beast. Right? I started by saying professions are a limited set of occupations in which individuals exercise a high level, members of the profession exercise a high level of control over their own work. In terms of, and the closer you come to this ideal type, right, of an occupation, you would see the occupation setting standards for entry, determining ethics, and most importantly, determining what qualifies as good professional work. The idea that there's a body that determines what qualifies as good professional work operates along the two dimensions of partiality and impersonality that I outlined. Members of a profession have a distinct set of incentives from non-professionals. They are accountable to members of their profession that can exclude them from the profession, can exercise disciplinary power over them, and also just stop being their friends, because part of being a professional is being having this professional solidarity with the people that you're educated with. I'm not sure. I think I'm the only lawyer in the room. Are you a lawyer? You're
no.
Not. You're just pretending. So I can tell you that after law school, like 90% of my friends were lawyers, right? And that's a huge part of being. That's part of the social category of professionalism, and it's part of these set of incentives. Like if you fall below professional standards, some people might just stop talking to you, and these just might be all of your friends, right? But apart from the different set of incentives that professionals have, professionals also have a different set of impersonal reasons that apply to the role that they play in society. So the reason why, in their own ideology, I'm not signing up to this, right? But in their own justifying ideology, professions deserve to have this control over the work of the members of the profession, is because they serve some other value and they're attached to some other value. And every classic profession, every profession that comes close to this ideal type of professionalism would have some value. So the professoriate promotes knowledge, medical doctors promote life and health, lawyers promote justice, the clergy profession promotes salvation. There's this value. And the presence of this value really challenges the modern logics of consumerism and bureaucracy. So the idea is that professionals, and that's what being a professional means, right? But in being a member of the profession, of course you have your part of the economy. You have clients if you're self-employed, or you have an employer if you're hired in some corporation or in the state or by the state. But the idea is that beyond the local function of what you do for your client or for your employer, you also serve some value. And that is supposed to stop you from doing everything that your client and your employment asks you to do, right? So the idea is that because you are accountable, so there are two dimensions. Because you are accountable not only to your employer and your client, but also to the members of your profession. And because the value of your work is not only the satisfaction of preferences of the people you work for, but also this other value, you are actually counteracting some of the function of free markets and the market-based economy. You're not just providing services, you're doing something else. And that's why we need professions. That's the ideology of professionalism, that we need professions in order to make sure that lawyers don't do everything that their clients ask them to, that doctors don't do anything that their clients ask them to, etc. Okay, so the idea is that office and profession are really, in many ways, antithetical to each other. And seen like this, one of the purposes of professionalism is to counteract some of the function of office, the instrumentalizing function of office, the putting individuals into use to perform a certain function. It limits that, it constrains that. And in contemporary institutional design, that is the way we public lawyers think about the design of governmental and private institutions, we use this. We use professionalism in particular institutions. In the university, we have an institutional design that is supposed to make professionals, members of the professoriate, responsible for office holding of all the major offices at the university, at least traditionally. Right? We already had a vice chancellor who was not a professor, but traditionally this is the structure. And the idea is that because they are professionals, they would make certain kind of decisions and would be barred from making other kind of decisions, or less likely, because they have other incentives that have to do with their professional life and other reasons that apply to them because they are professionals. And the same goes for the modern hospital. The modern hospital, who's traditionally run by medical doctors that occupy offices within the hospital. It's the same sort of institutional design that is supposed to put professionalism in the front of center of office holding. But most importantly, for my purposes, the judiciary. The judiciary is a whole branch of government that is not only independent, it's not only separated, but it is also a realm of a particular profession. And that's not a coincidence, nor is it an eternal truth. So up until modernity, most courts were not professional courts. The rationale behind having a professional court, I don't know if you're following the Brexit. Yesterday it was graduation. It was on the stage, but the lawyers were with their phones following the live blogging of the UK Supreme Court on Brexit. There was a woman, and she spoke with professional authority. She was not just an office holder. She reasoned like a lawyer. She spoke like a lawyer. She had reasons that applied to her due to her professional identity, regardless of being a government employee, regardless of being in office in a bureaucracy, regardless of being in office in... Okay. Yeah, and we kind of said that, like professionalism. So professionalism is kind of a pocket within capitalist economies. Like we know it because we're so used to the attack on professionalism from neoliberal ideology and from... by the way, I might be, I'm not the strongest critic of neoliberal ideology. I partake sometimes. But when we talk about the professions limiting competition and denying entry, we're kind of railing against the professions as clearly anti-capitalist and anti-free market institutions. But sometimes it's helpful. Because sometimes we want institutions, like the university or the hospital or the judiciary, that would defy pressures from markets and will defy pressures from whoever holds the strings of the purse. And we might want to harness professionalism exactly in order to do that job. Do you know what time it is? I'm sorry.
It's 25:02.
Okay, so I'll just finish up.
2 minutes.
Okay. This is all very nice, talking about contemporary institutions in this way, but sociologists who write about professionalism noted pretty much, there are different views here, but what I'm saying, I think, is pretty uncontroversial. That professionalism since the 1960s and 1970s is in decline, or at least shifting. It's shifting. And some say it's shifting away from what people call the trustees of social values model, which is the model that I'm kind of channeling here, as attached to some impersonal value, etc., to professionalism as expertise. That is, as experts, just like other experts, that render a service, that give their expertise in order to satisfy the preferences of their clients and employers. And this is kind of shows, it's both influence from the robustness of capitalist political economy and neoliberal ideology, and also obviously strengthens it because it erodes these pockets of anti-capitalism. And in reality, it just means that the de facto control of most professions over the work of the members is in decline. Professional associations are weaker. The solidarity within professions is weaker. And the idea that professions serve some impersonal value is kind of cynically accepted as something you say. I don't know if people take it seriously. So I think that and different professions are obviously influenced by this at different rates and in different ways, but I think that it's correct that this is a process that we're seeing across the board. If this is right, and I think it is, but I'm not claiming it is because sociologists claim it, but if this is right, then this really impacts this institution of office and profession, the conjunction of office holding and professionalism. Because if we have institutions whose design is premised on office holders being professionals, having a different set of incentives, being attached to some ideology that promotes particular values, and that would somehow constrain the instrumentalization of their work for their clients and for their employers, then the erosion of professionalism erodes part of the balance of this structure. It erodes parts of the checks that we have in place in these institutions. And if that's right, well, okay, this is a question shouldn't be here because this is a question for lawyers. No lawyers in the room. So who should care about this? We should all care about this. Because it might explain things that are going on at the university, right? If the profession of the professoriate declines in the sense of a professional association that exercises control over the work of its members and sees itself as attached to values that might impede it from pursuing certain goals, then that does something to the balance between office and profession that offices within the university are supposed to be based on. And if we're constitutional lawyers that are interested in separation of powers, we might say that this particular branch, the judiciary, which is supposed to be a professional branch, and has extraordinary privileges and access to power because it is believed to be professional, if the legal profession is in decline, then something radical might be happening to this branch, which might cause us to rethink the separation of powers in a fundamental way, or the role of legal counsels within the administrative state. And the point is that in this part of the paper that is addressed to lawyers, that constitutional lawyers and administrative lawyers should take professionalism and the decline of professionalism to be of direct interest to them. So I think that the decline of the legal profession is a direct constitutional concern, and I think that the decline of all professions is a direct concern of administrative lawyers. And if they think that we love our institutions the way they are, they might want to do something about this decline. Or maybe have a more radical rethinking of what's going on. For the legal philosophers who are incredibly interested in the judicial function and judicial office, this is also very interesting because judicial office is this classic conjunction of office and profession. If the balance between profession and office is kind of disturbed, then this might do something to legal authority and might even do something to the nature of law in the 21st century. Something to discuss? Brilliant.